This is the story of my comeback win. My 60-second tournament at Blue Belt where I lost in my very first match of the day, only to come back and win the open class thanks to my secret weapon. You'll see my training, warm-up, weight cut, some friends, and all 3 of my divisions. And stick around to the end for an unexpected twist in my no-gi division against Ben and his wrestling. This is a story of perseverance and other lessons from competing in Jiu Jitsu to hopefully inspire you on your Jiu Jitsu journey. Anybody can beat anybody, and even if you feel like giving up, just keep going. Competition morning is usually pretty choreographed. I wake up, check my weight, throw on some music, shower, and get ready for the day. Except today is a little different because I have a few things to take care of before the competition starts at 3:30. I arrive at Samurai at 7:30 a.m. and I'm here for 2 reasons: to get a light warm-up in and begin cutting weight. This morning I weighed in just under what I'm supposed to weigh, but if I stay at this weight, that means I can't eat or drink much for the next 7 hours. And even worse, my no-gi bracket starts 3 hours after my gi bracket. If I eat or drink too much between my divisions, I risk disqualification for being overweight for no-gi, which I have to weigh less for than the gi. And while I've historically done about half and half adult and masters divisions, recently I'm doing adult for the challenge, which I'll be doing at BJJ Tour today. In addition to that challenge, my goal this year is to get better at stand-up. So I won't be pulling guard at all, unlike the last 2 years of competition. It's gonna be an interesting day. After I rolled with Rich, we talked about competition and the phenomenon of anybody being able to beat anybody. I mentioned some of my accolades. I've had over 230 matches since April 2022, and I'm currently ranked number 1 in my IBJJF division. That's blue, lightweight, gi, master 1. And this sounds nice, but I've been on the receiving end of losing in the first round of tournaments several times in spite of being highly ranked. Even though BJJ Tour is a smaller local competition and it's not even ranked, you just have no idea who's gonna show up. I was starting to get a good sweat in, but I knew it wasn't gonna be enough. In 2022 and 2023, I competed mostly at lightweight, but did a few cuts to feather for several major tournaments like Master Worlds and No-Gi Pans, and No-Gi Euros. But after the winter, the decision to stop counting calories, and lifting a lot more weights, I've started to gain weight. Not enough to be a middleweight yet in no-gi, but enough that I need to cut a couple pounds to make no-gi lightweight. So I've got to head over to the sauna this morning so that I don't get disqualified. And I know I need to treat all tournaments with due diligence and respect, so I prepare accordingly and act intentionally, regardless of the size of the tournament. The sauna actually feels super good for a little while. On recovery days, it's perfect, especially when mixed with the cold plunge. But staying too long in the sauna on competition days can make you tired and dehydrated, which is the last thing I want. I have plenty of time to contemplate in the sauna, so I also start wondering about my thumb that I injured last weekend at an open mat. I haven't been able to really grip anything. I can barely even pull up my pants. I also remembered back at Samurai this morning a talk with my friend Dylan, who mentioned Ben would be in my division today. He said he told Ben about my ankle locks. Actually, I had a match with Dylan where he was on the receiving end of my ankle lock, and he gave me some intel on Ben too. That Ben is good at wrestling and judo, which I guess is bad in a good way for me since I am trying to work on my stand-up this year. And I wondered if I would end up having a match with Ben. There's also a fear of failure, which is mostly just a pressure I put on myself, because at the end of the day, I'm really the one who cares the most. And as it turns out, it's actually not failure that I'm afraid of, it's what other people would think of my failure. But with all of these fears, I remember that it's important to be mindful of them and accept that they are present, and then go back to focusing on what I can control, and really try to understand the true nature of these fears. After a couple hours of rotating between the sauna, cold plunge, and the hot tub, it was time to check my weight again. I had lost almost 5 pounds, which was way more than necessary, but that meant I could eat a decent amount of food before the competition. And it also meant that I was ready to head to the tournament. My training schedule is pretty consistent and covers a lot of areas. I try to train Jiu Jitsu every single day, hitting classes during the week and then competitions and open mats on the weekends. I do strength training twice a week and also recently started judo. I'm focusing on takedowns and closed guard, and Coach Greg from my new team at Odyssey has begun strategizing with me this year for what to work on. And shout out to Benji and the crew at True Mvmnt for giving me a good place to train as well. Training is part of my life now, so I'm pretty much always ready for competition. And now it was time for another one. I got in my car and drove like 45 minutes to the venue, the gymnasium at San Francisco State University. I got there about 30 minutes early and saw my name was already on the check-in screen, so I went to weigh in. And while I was good on weight in the gi, I was told that unlike the previous BJJ tour in Santa Cruz, I would not be able to weigh in right now for no gi too, which would mean that what I predicted would happen It just happened. I would have to be very careful about eating or drinking anything between now and no-gi or risk getting disqualified for no-gi. I was a little nervous, tired from the sauna, hungry, thirsty, but I couldn't drink much, and I noticed a constant pain in my thumb every time I tried to grip something. I focused on staying warm and getting into a flow state, and my friend Tara, who was the mat coordinator, began to round us up to take us all mat side to compete. It was almost time. My name was called, and then I walked onto the mat. It was showtime. My plan was to win the stand-up grip exchange and get a takedown, and suddenly he pulled guard, tried to sweep me, and I came up at the last second, which awarded him an advantage right off the bat. I could tell he felt really strong and really technical for his level, and I got stuck in his shallow lasso for most of the match, trying some passes, but ultimately not able to get past his guard. He got his second advantage by coming up on a single that went out of bounds, and I was still down. I managed to escape a slick omoplata attempt, but now time was just flying by. In the last seconds, I cranked up the intensity to try to pass his half guard, but it was too late. I was awarded an advantage, but he still won. All of that work, all of that time spent, just for 6 minutes of mat time, losing in my very first match. But that's the nature of these single elimination tournaments. In the midst of the adrenaline, there can be a lot of emotion that wells up inside. You can be affected in these moments by everything happening in your life. Any stressful events, relationship issues, you name it. It all finds a way to the surface, however brief. You also remember the other times you've lost, wondering why you're losing again. Shouldn't you be better by now? Why keep going if you're just gonna keep losing? Maybe you'll never be good enough. What are other people gonna think of you? Just competing to lose? And with those thoughts momentarily flooding through my mind, I guess that was it for my gi division. Until Tara approached me and asked if I wanted to do open class, which is a division with all weight classes mixed together. This caught me off guard because I'm used to the IBJJF where you have to get on the podium to be eligible to sign up for open class. Internally, I hesitated and then resolved to just do it, to just keep going. Because even when it feels like it's over, you still have a fighting chance. And not only would I be able to get more matches in the open class and work on my Jiu Jitsu, which was the whole goal in the first place, but Tara said I might also get a consolation match with the other guy who also lost in the first round. But he was injured by an ankle lock. So I waited and watched the guy who beat me in his next match. He ended up getting DQ'd for stalling penalties, so I no longer had the excuse of I got beat by the guy who won the whole thing. And I didn't get the consolation match either since the guy was too injured to continue competing. Although luckily he was walking, so I'm thankful for his sake that it wasn't too bad. But that's what happens when you get ankle locked too hard. I visited the podium briefly where I saw Ben and my opponent getting double third. Me and Ben were talking and laughing with each other, but inside I knew there was a possibility we might have a match together still. And now it was time for open class where I would face opponents much larger than me. And I still had to prepare for no-gi after this, and the possibility of going up against Ben and his takedowns. In these moments when it feels like everything is against me and that I have nothing left to lose and maybe even no possibility to win, that's when I feel free. I feel like I thrive. There's a voice in my head and it says, what if I won? How crazy would that be? I made it through my first match with relative ease, getting the better of my opponent in several positions and finishing with a sliding collar choke submission from the back. But this was no time for complacency. My next match was tougher. My opponent was shorter but heavier and really strong. I beat him on points, landing one sumigaeshi takedown. I learned this from Tony Lettner at Judo at the Plex the weekend prior, which meant I had accomplished at least one of my other initial goals, finally, to get a takedown. So far I had managed to not pull guard at all, but the fact that I'd gone the full 6 minutes for this match meant my grips were absolutely exhausted. But it was time for the finals now. I reflected on some past tournaments where I've made it to the finals only to lose and get second place. It was like a curse last year. It almost got funny at one point. It most recently happened at Master Worlds 2023 after 5 matches, and then also at No-Gi Euros. It then occurred to me that I should just follow the principles I talk about all the time, to focus on what I can control. And I was determined not to win this match, but rather to commit to giving my very best effort and to just keep going. And that's what I did. But Noah was tough. He almost had me a few times at the start, but I knew if I could get into a solid passing position, then I could win. And then suddenly, he took me down, and now he was ahead 2 points. And I was stuck under a heavy guy. The seconds were ticking down, and I was gonna lose in the last minute if I didn't somehow get back on top and pass his guard or submit him. So I decided to go for my favorite move and highest percentage submission, the butterfly ashi ankle lock. And it worked. I had won the final, and thus I was open class champion. But I still had one more division left. I hadn't planned on doing the open class, so I was way more tired and rushed than I expected. And I wasn't even sure if I was on weight for no-gi. I quickly changed into my no-gi gear, got onto the scale to weigh in, and I was almost a pound underweight. Perfect. That meant it was time for some water, electrolytes, and a banana. I was ushered directly from the scale to the mat, where the rest of my division was waiting. I saw Ben there too, but there was still no certainty that we'd have a match together. Suddenly, my name was called and I stepped up to face my first opponent. He was taller and lankier and felt strong on his feet. After a bit of back and forth, I managed to sneak to his back like at the San Jose Open. And just when I tried to trip him and fulfill my goal again with a second takedown, I couldn't get on top and ended in closed guard. I had my advantage, so I was up, and I knew now was my chance to work on my closed guard that I had been training with Benji and talking to Greg about. And since I was only up by an advantage, I had to be super careful not to tire myself out and get my guard passed. I tried various attacks, but nothing was working. And eventually, as he was beginning to break open my guard, I saw there was very little time left, and I knew I had to switch to my strongest attack. So I went to butterfly ashi and then straight for the ankle lock, and it worked. My plan wasn't to get the ankle lock originally, but I'm glad I had it in my back pocket. I went mat side and waited to see who would be up next, and it turns out Ben was up next. This match would determine if I would compete against him or not, so I waited in anticipation. By now, Ben was way up on points, and his opponent started going for my attack, the ankle lock. But I knew Ben must have been working on his ankle lock defense after consulting with Dylan, so I was on the edge of my seat wondering if he'd escape. And it turns out, his opponent's attack was not strong enough, and Ben escaped and emerged victorious, which meant I would be facing Ben next in the semifinals. I was nervous that I'd be standing with him, but then I remembered what my training partner in black belt Tamara said. What about me? Focus on my game, what I can execute, not just be worried about preventing what he wants to do. Reflecting on my stand-up training, I knew that I could be the guy with good takedowns. I didn't always have to fear wrestlers or judokas. It was time to test myself, and even if it failed, I would walk away having accomplished a goal that I set that was within my power, and having learned something. It all would work out to my benefit anyway. My plan was to look for an arm drag, a throw by, or a duck under like I had hit at San Jose Open earlier. When we locked up in our collar ties, I felt his pressure immediately. I know I had to stay loose but strong and feel where his movement was going so that I could use that against him. I was tired and my shoulders started hurting, and he kept throwing his arm over the top of my collar ties, so I felt blocked for all my entries. I wasn't gonna give up though. I started pressuring harder and harder into him when suddenly he used my own pressure against me and threw me with one of the hardest throws I've ever been caught with. I just got highlighted. This was the opposite of what was supposed to happen, but reality doesn't always match up with what you want to happen. I was stuck in his kesikatami while he tried to pressure tap me, arm lock me, and head and arm choke me. This was a hell of a position to be stuck in, just fending off his attacks, not being able to escape. But I wasn't gonna give up. I knew there had to be a way out. And suddenly, the ref gave him a penalty for stalling. I had to take advantage of this. I knew he'd feel rushed now, that he had to move to another position, so I waited. First he went knee on belly. I turtled and he almost took my back, but I defended and let him take mount as I predicted a possible arm triangle and got my arm into the right position to prevent it. I had one last trick up my sleeve, and the code word was guacamole. See, in 2022 at my first World Championship, my friend Will and I devised a secret code word, almost as a joke, for a last-ditch attack from bottom mount. Now this sounds crazy, but it would take advantage of my biggest strength, the ankle lock. The idea was that if I was down in the last seconds of the match, Will would shout guacamole, and that would be my cue to let my opponent mount me, do a kipping escape, and then enter into my straight footlock. Will wasn't at BJJ Tour to shout guacamole, but I knew that I could kip right into position to execute on the ankle lock, and I had less than a minute to do it. So I went for it. As I wrapped up his ankle, I wondered if he'd escape like so many others had before, but I felt like my attack was strong. I cranked on the ankle, but he still wasn't tapping. So I put more strength into it, and suddenly, for what felt like minutes of waiting, I felt the tap. I had done it. I had won the match, thanks to guacamole. I still had one match left though, that would be the finals. It was a good back and forth match with a really strong opponent. I accomplished my goal there as well, to not pull guard. We were in an ankle lock battle for a while, and he was able to get the better of me a few times, positionally speaking, and I wasn't able to pass his guard. I learned a lot from this match, just as I did the others. And most of all, I stayed focused on just putting my best effort forward and just kept going. It was time for the podium. On the way there, I ran into some old friends and acquaintances. At these events, you're almost never alone. After the matches, Ben and I chatted for a while, and I complimented his takedown, and he complimented my ankle lock. I also had a good conversation with my opponent in the finals, Samuel. We're staying in touch now because we're gonna try to train together, maybe hit some open mats. I also chatted with Arthur a little bit, and thinking back to it, I even chatted with my opponents during open class. That's what happens at these tournaments. You come here to win and end up learning a whole lot about yourself and Jiu Jitsu, and make new friends and forge connections. I had talked to my teammate Stefan outside earlier during the competition, and he was saying a similar thing.
You know, I made 2 different friends today, Two new friends. I'm gonna see them in the future when we train. They invited me to train with them, I invited them to train with us, so it's all love, at the end of the day. I think that's a pretty awesome part about Jiu Jitsu, just the community and just, you know, at the end of the day, you know, if you don't get a medal, you might be able to make a friend at least, you know? Which is probably even better than making the medal, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Tournaments never go quite how you expect. Sometimes what you think will be the easiest ends up being the toughest, and sometimes the complete opposite. There are so many things outside of your control in an experience like this, and you learn the value of courage, determination, discipline, hard work, and what it takes to dig deep down and just keep going. You make new friends, have a good time, get a great workout in, and if you get a medal, that's just icing on the cake, and it makes for a good Instagram post. Every time I test myself, I come out a slightly better person, if I pay attention to the lessons. But everything has a cost. Nobody ever said it was supposed to be easy, and I'm glad it's hard.